Officer Derek Thompson had been wearing his badge for 8 years. 8 years of traffic stops, 8 years of arrests, 8 years of people doing exactly what he told them to do. He'd gotten used to it. The respect, the authority, the way people's voices changed when they saw his uniform. That Tuesday evening started like any other. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink, and Derek was cruising through the Riverside Heights neighborhood. Nice houses, neat lawns, the kind of place where people didn't usually give him trouble. That's when he spotted the black sedan with the broken taillight. Just a small crack really, but it was enough. Derek flipped on his lights and pulled the car over. Dr. Victoria Hayes had been awake for nearly 16 hours. Her shift at the hospital had run long, as they always did, and all she wanted was to get home, take off her shoes, and collapse on her couch. When she saw the blue lights flashing behind her, her heart sank. She pulled over carefully, her hands already shaking slightly from exhaustion. Derek approached the driver's side window, his flashlight in hand, even though there was still plenty of daylight left. Victoria rolled down her window and offered a tired smile. "Good evening, officer. Was I speeding?" "License and registration," Derek said, skipping the pleasantries. He'd learned early on that being too friendly made people think they could negotiate. Better to keep it direct. Victoria reached for her glove compartment, moving slowly and deliberately. She'd had this conversation with her father years ago. Keep your hands visible, be polite, don't make sudden movements. She handed over her documents. Derek looked at the license, then at Victoria, then back at the license. "You know your taillight's broken, is it?" Victoria turned to look, genuinely surprised. "I had no idea. I'll get it fixed tomorrow, I promise." "Step out of the vehicle." Victoria blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "I said step out of the vehicle." Derek's voice had gotten harder, the way it did when someone questioned him. "Officer, I don't understand. It's just a taillight. Can't you just give me a warning or a ticket?" That was the moment things shifted. Derek heard the question as a challenge. Who was she to tell him how to do his job? He'd pulled over hundreds of cars, made hundreds of arrests. He knew what he was doing. "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask you again. Step out of the vehicle now." Victoria felt her pulse quicken. She'd done nothing wrong. She was tired. She was a doctor. She'd just spent all day saving lives, and now she was being ordered out of her car for a broken taillight she didn't even know about. But she also knew better than to argue with a police officer on the side of the road. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, her legs stiff from the long drive. "I'm going to search your vehicle," Derek announced. "Wait, why? I haven't done anything wrong." "Do you have something to hide?" "No, but don't you need probable cause or my permission to search my car?" There it was again. Another question. Another challenge to his authority. Derek felt his jaw tighten. This woman in her fancy clothes, in her nice car, in this nice neighborhood, thought she knew better than him. "Are you refusing to cooperate with a police investigation?" "I'm not refusing anything," Victoria said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear rising in her chest. "I'm just asking about my rights." Derek stepped closer. "Your rights are to do what I tell you to do." Victoria's hands were trembling now, but not from exhaustion anymore. She slowly reached into her pocket for her phone. If this was going to escalate, she wanted a record of it. She'd seen too many stories on the news. Too many people who said one thing happened while officers said another. "What are you doing?" Derek's hand moved toward his belt. "I'm just getting my phone. I want to record this interaction." "That's my right." "Put the phone away." "Officer, I'm allowed to record." Derek moved fast. Before Victoria could even turn on her camera, he knocked the phone from her hand. It clattered onto the pavement, the screen cracking against the concrete. "Hey, you can't. You're resisting arrest," Derek said loudly, reaching for his handcuffs. "Resisting arrest? For what? I haven't done anything." But Derek was already spinning her around, pulling her arms behind her back. The metal cuffs bit into her wrists. Victoria's mind was racing. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. She was a doctor. She helped people. She paid her taxes. She'd never even gotten a speeding ticket. "You have the right to remain silent," Derek began, his voice mechanical, practiced. He'd said these words so many times they'd lost all meaning. A neighbor across the street had come out onto his porch, watching the scene unfold. Derek noticed him and called out, "Sir, go back inside." Police business, but the neighbor didn't move. He stood there, arms crossed, watching. Derek radioed for backup, explaining that he had a suspect in custody for obstruction of justice and resisting arrest. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived, their lights painting the quiet street in alternating red and blue. Officer Chen, Derek's occasional partner, walked over. "What have we got?" "Traffic stop went south," Derek explained. "Broken taillight, refused to comply, tried to interfere with my investigation. Got aggressive when I attempted to search the vehicle." Victoria wanted to scream. That wasn't what happened. That wasn't what happened at all. But with 3 officers now standing around her, with handcuffs cutting into her wrists, with neighbors starting to come out of their houses, she felt powerless. "I'm a doctor," she said quietly. "I work at Memorial Hospital. I was just trying to get home." "Well, doctor," Derek said, "you should have thought about that before you decided to resist." They loaded her into the back of the patrol car. Through the window, Victoria could see her own car, still parked with the door open, her broken phone on the ground beside it. She could see the neighbor still watching from his porch. She could see the sun finishing its descent below the horizon. At the station, they processed her like any other arrest. Fingerprints, mugshot, personal belongings confiscated. The fluorescent lights were too bright. The holding cell was cold. Victoria sat on the metal bench, still wearing her work clothes, still exhausted from her shift, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. 8 hours ago, she'd been in surgery, her hands steady, her mind focused, saving someone's life. Now she was in jail, arrested by an officer who seemed offended that she'd dared to question him. Derek, meanwhile, was back at his desk, typing up his report. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. He'd written reports like this before. Hostile subject, failure to comply, aggressive behavior, resisting arrest. The words came easily. He noted the broken taillight, the traffic stop, the escalation. He described Victoria as combative and uncooperative. What he didn't mention was the phone, or the neighbor who'd witnessed everything, or the fact that the search he'd demanded had no legal basis. These were details that didn't fit his narrative, so they didn't make it into the report. He saved the document, filed it electronically, and clocked out for the night. Just another Tuesday. Just another arrest. He'd be in court in a few weeks to testify if needed, but these cases usually got dismissed or pled down. The suspect would pay a fine, maybe do some community service, and that would be that. Derek had no way of knowing that this arrest would be different. That the woman he'd handcuffed and humiliated was about to become his worst nightmare. That her broken phone had uploaded its last few seconds of recording to the cloud before it hit the pavement. That the neighbor on the porch had security cameras that captured everything. He drove home that night feeling satisfied. He'd done his job. He'd maintained order. He'd shown that nobody, not even in their fancy neighborhood with their nice cars, was above the law. But Victoria, sitting in that cold holding cell, wasn't thinking about submission. She was thinking about justice. She was thinking about every person who'd been in her position but without her education, her resources, her knowledge. She was thinking about what came next, and what came next would change everything. Derek Thompson learned something important during his first month as a police officer. The badge changed everything. It changed how people looked at him, how they talked to him, how they listened when he spoke. Before the badge, he was just another guy. Average height, average build, forgettable face. People looked right through him at the grocery store. Servers ignored him at restaurants. Nobody seemed to notice when he walked into a room. But put on that uniform, everything shifted. Suddenly people stepped aside when he walked past. They said yes sir and no sir without him even asking. Their voices got quieter, more careful. Some looked nervous even when they'd done nothing wrong. Derek liked that feeling. More than liked it. He craved it. His training officer, a 20-year veteran named Rodriguez, had pulled him aside during his second week. "Listen, kid, out here your word is gold. Judge sees that uniform, reads your report. 9 times out of 10 they're going to believe you over whoever you arrested. That's just how it works." Rodriguez had meant it as advice. Be thorough, be honest. That trust is a responsibility. But Derek heard something different. He heard power. Over the years, Derek developed a reputation. Some officers called him aggressive. Others said he had a short fuse. His supervisors used words like proactive and assertive in his performance reviews. They praised his arrest numbers, his conviction rate, his willingness to handle difficult situations. What they didn't talk about were the complaints. There had been 17 of them over 8 years. Citizens claiming excessive force, unlawful searches, false arrests. But complaints were easy to dismiss. It was always their word against his, and his word carried the weight of the badge. There was the college student he'd arrested for jaywalking after the kid made a joke about having nothing better to do. The arrest report said the student had been belligerent and threatening. The charges were dropped 2 weeks later, but by then the kid had already missed classes, paid bail, and learned to fear police officers. There was the elderly man he'd cited for sitting on his own porch after 8 p.m., claiming he was violating a noise ordinance that didn't actually exist. When the man's daughter, a paralegal, tried to point this out, Derek arrested her too. The city quietly settled that complaint for $5,000. There was the street vendor he'd shut down for not having the right permits, even though the woman had shown him her valid business license. He'd confiscated her cart, her food, everything. She never came back to that corner. Derek considered it a win. His colleagues knew. They saw the pattern. In the locker room, some of the younger officers would exchange glances when Derek told his stories. The way his encounters always seemed to escalate. The way people who questioned him always ended up in handcuffs. Officer Lisa Watkins had tried to say something once. She'd been partnered with Derek on a call about a noise complaint. When they arrived, Derek had immediately started threatening the homeowner with arrest. Lisa had pulled him aside. "Derek, it's just a birthday party. They'll turn down the music. We don't need to." "Don't tell me how to do my job," he'd snapped. "You want to be soft? Go work school crossings." Lisa never partnered with him again. She also never reported what she'd seen. Nobody did. The department culture didn't encourage that kind of thing. You backed up your fellow officers. You didn't create problems. You didn't make waves. Derek's body camera had a strange habit of malfunctioning, not all the time. Just during certain encounters, the times when things got heated, when his version of events might not match up with what actually happened. The department's tech guys had looked at it twice, claimed they couldn't find any problems, and that was that. He'd learned other tricks too. How to write a report that covered all the legal bases, how to phrase things so they sounded justified. Furtive movements was a good one. Appeared to be reaching for something worked well. Refused to comply with lawful orders was practically bulletproof. The truth was messier. The truth was that Derek felt disrespected easily. A question felt like a challenge. A citizen knowing their rights felt like an insult. Someone with education, money, or status made him feel small, and he didn't like feeling small. That's what really happened with Victoria Hayes. It wasn't about the broken taillight. It wasn't even about her refusing to let him search her car. It was about the way she'd questioned him. The calm, educated tone in her voice. The fact that she knew the law. The way she'd reached for her phone like she didn't trust him. Derek had felt that familiar anger rising in his chest. Who did she think she was? Sitting in her expensive car, wearing her professional clothes, acting like she was better than him. Like his badge didn't matter. Like he didn't matter. So he'd taught her a lesson. The same lesson he'd taught 17 other people over 8 years. You don't question me. You don't challenge me. You do what I say when I say it, or you face the consequences. After Victoria's arrest, Derek had gone home and slept fine. He heated up leftover pizza, watched television, and went to bed at his usual time. He didn't think about Victoria sitting in that holding cell. Didn't wonder if she had family worried about her. Didn't consider that she might have been telling the truth about being a doctor who just wanted to go home. Why would he? In his mind, he'd done nothing wrong. She'd resisted. She'd been uncooperative. He'd followed protocol. End of story. T2. Next morning at the station, a couple of officers asked him about the arrest. Derek gave them the quick version. Traffic stop gone bad. Hostile subject. Had to take control of the situation. They nodded and moved on. Just another day in the job. What Derek didn't know was that Victoria's phone, in those few seconds before he knocked it from her hand, had captured audio. The cloud backup service she used for work had automatically started uploading. The file was sitting on a server somewhere, time-stamped and genuine. What Derek didn't know was that the neighbor across the street, the one who'd stood on his porch watching, had a security system. High-definition cameras covering his driveway and the street beyond. Those cameras had captured the entire encounter from a distance. Clear video showing Derek's aggression, showing Victoria's compliance, showing the moment he knocked away her phone. What Derek didn't know was that Victoria's car had a dash cam. She'd installed it years ago after a minor accident where the other driver had lied about what happened. That dash cam had recorded everything from inside the vehicle. Every word, every moment. But Derek felt safe. He'd done this before, after all, 17 times before, and nothing had ever come of those complaints. They got filed, investigated by his own department, and quietly dismissed. The system protected its own. He'd sent a text to a buddy of his, Officer Mitchell, right after the arrest. Another uppity one who needed to learn respect. Mitchell had sent back a laughing emoji. Just guys being guys. Just cops letting off steam. 3 weeks passed. Derek worked his regular shifts. Made his regular traffic stops. Wrote his regular reports. He got the court summons for Victoria's case and tossed it in his car. He'd gotten dozens of these over the years. Show up. Testify if needed, watch the case get dismissed or pled down. He'd probably be in and out in an hour. The morning of the court date, Derek put on his dress uniform. Polished shoes, pressed shirt, badge gleaming on his chest. He looked good, professional, authoritative. The kind of officer judges trusted. He drove to the courthouse listening to talk radio, drinking coffee from his travel mug. He was thinking about lunch, about where he might grab a sandwich after this was done. He wasn't thinking about Victoria. He barely remembered her face. Derek had spent 8 years believing his badge made him untouchable. 8 years of complaints that went nowhere. 8 years of citizens who couldn't fight back. 8 years of getting away with behavior that would have gotten anyone else fired or arrested. He walked into that courthouse feeling confident, feeling powerful, feeling like he always did when he wore that uniform. He had no idea that everything was about to fall apart, that the woman he'd arrested wasn't just any woman, that she had resources, knowledge, and connections he couldn't imagine, that she'd spent the last 3 weeks building a case that would destroy not just his career, but expose everything he'd been doing for years. Derek took his seat in the courtroom, nodded at the prosecutor, and waited for the proceedings to begin. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered. And then the door opened and Victoria Hayes walked in. But she wasn't alone. The courtroom was more crowded than Derek expected. Usually these hearings were quick, boring affairs, a handful of people at most. But today every seat seemed filled. He noticed it but didn't think much of it. Maybe there was a big case scheduled after this one. He sat in the front row, his uniform crisp and perfect. The prosecutor, a tired-looking woman named Angela Martinez, gave him a brief nod. They'd worked together before. This should be straightforward. Then Victoria walked in and Derek barely recognized her. Gone was the exhausted woman in rumpled work clothes. Victoria wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Derek made in a month. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She carried herself differently, too, confident, almost regal. Behind her walked 3 people in equally expensive suits, carrying leather briefcases and looking like they meant business. Derek shifted in his seat. Why did she have lawyers? Plural? For a simple resisting arrest charge? The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Patricia Morrison entered. She was known as a no-nonsense judge, fair but tough. Derek had testified in her courtroom twice before. She'd believed him both times. Case number 4782, the bailiff announced. The People versus Victoria Hayes. Angela Martinez stood up, shuffling her papers. But before she could speak, Victoria's lead attorney rose to his feet. He was tall, gray-haired, and had the kind of presence that filled the room. Your Honor, I'm Attorney Robert Chen, representing Dr. Victoria Hayes. Before we proceed, I'd like to file a motion to dismiss all charges against my client. Angela's head snapped up. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. Derek frowned. This wasn't how these things usually went. On what grounds? The judge asked. On the grounds that the arrest was unlawful, the charges are false, and we have substantial evidence proving my client's innocence and Officer Thompson's misconduct. The word misconduct hit Derek like cold water. He sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. Angela looked flustered. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We haven't seen any. We filed our evidence with the court yesterday afternoon." Attorney Chen interrupted smoothly. "Per proper procedure. I apologize if the prosecutor's office hasn't had time to review it yet." Judge Morrison pulled up something on her computer screen. Her expression shifted as she read. Derek couldn't see what she was looking at, but he didn't like the way her face changed. "Approach the bench," the judge said quietly. "Both of you." Angela and Attorney Chen walked up to the judge's bench. There was a hushed conversation Derek couldn't hear. He watched Angela's face go pale. He watched her glance back at him with something that looked like concern. Or maybe anger. He couldn't tell. When they returned to their seats, Angela looked like she'd been punched in the stomach. "Your Honor," Attorney Chen said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "May I present our evidence?" "Proceed." What happened next was Derek's worst nightmare unfolding in slow motion. First, Attorney Chen set up a laptop and projector. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A security camera footage from the residence of Mr. Peter Lawson, who lives directly across from where Officer Thompson conducted his traffic stop." The screen flickered to life. There, in high-definition color, was the entire encounter. Derek could see himself approaching Victoria's car, could see her rolling down her window smiling, could see himself ordering her out of the vehicle. The camera was far enough away that you couldn't hear the audio, but you could see everything clearly. You could see Victoria's calm, compliant body language. You could see Derek's aggressive posture. You could see the exact moment he knocked the phone from her hand. You could see her surprise, her fear. You could see him forcing her into handcuffs while she didn't resist at all. Derek felt sweat forming on his upper lip. That neighbor, that damn neighbor with his security cameras. "As you can see, Your Honor," Attorney Chen continued, "Dr. Hayes complied with every request. She exited the vehicle when ordered. She made no aggressive moves. The only escalation came from Officer Thompson." "Exhibit B," Attorney Chen said, and the screen changed. Dash camera footage from inside Dr. Hayes' vehicle. Derek's stomach dropped. He hadn't known about a dash camera. This footage had audio. Crystal clear audio. The courtroom heard everything. Heard Derek's harsh tone from the start. Heard Victoria's polite responses. Heard her asking about probable cause for the search. Heard Derek telling her, "Your rights are to do what I tell you to do." Several people in the courtroom gallery shifted uncomfortably. Judge Morrison's expression grew harder. "And finally, Exhibit C," Attorney Chen said. Partial audio recording from Dr. Hayes' phone, which was uploading to cloud storage in the seconds before Officer Thompson struck it from her hand. The audio was brief, but damning. Victoria's voice saying, "I'm just getting my phone. I want to record this interaction." "That's my right." Derek's voice. "Put the phone away." Victoria. "Officer, I'm allowed to record." Then the sound of impact, a gasp. The phone hitting pavement. Dr. Hayes' phone was destroyed during this encounter, Attorney Chen explained. The screen was shattered and the device was confiscated. However, the cloud backup captured these final moments. Derek wanted to leave, just stand up and walk out, but his legs felt frozen. "There's more, Your Honor," Attorney Chen said. His tone was calm, almost casual, but there was steel underneath. "We'd also like to submit evidence regarding Officer Thompson's pattern of behavior." Pattern of behavior. Those words made Derek's blood run cold. "Objection," Angela said weakly. "That's not relevant to this case." "I'll allow it," Judge Morrison said. "I want to see where this is going." Attorney Chen pulled out a thick folder. "We've documented 17 complaints against Officer Thompson over the past 8 years. 17 citizens who reported similar experiences, unlawful searches, false arrests, excessive force. Charges that were later dismissed or resulted in quiet settlements by the city." He began laying out documents on the evidence table. Names, dates, case numbers. Derek recognized some of them. The college kid. The elderly man's daughter. Others he'd half forgotten. In each case, Attorney Chen continued, the complaint was investigated internally and dismissed. But when we contacted these citizens and reviewed the available evidence, a clear pattern emerges. Officer Thompson has a history of escalating minor encounters, particularly when citizens question his authority or assert their legal rights. Angela was frantically flipping through papers on her table. She looked like she was scrambling to salvage something. "Anything, Your Honor," Attorney Chen said. "I'd also like to submit this text message, sent by Officer Thompson to a fellow officer approximately 10 minutes after Dr. Hayes' arrest." The message appeared on the screen. Derek's own words, time-stamped and undeniable. Another uppity one who needed to learn respect. The courtroom was dead silent. Derek could feel people staring at him. The prosecutor wouldn't look at him. Even the bailiff seemed uncomfortable. Judge Morrison took off her reading glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she put them back on, she looked directly at Derek for the first time. Her gaze was cold. "Before I rule on this motion," the judge said, "I want to know something. Dr. Hayes, would you please state your full name and occupation for the record?" Victoria stood. Her voice was clear and steady. "My name is Dr. Victoria Hayes, Your Honor. I'm a medical doctor, board-certified in emergency medicine. I work at Memorial Hospital. But that's only part of what I do." She paused, and Derek felt his world tilting. "I'm also a licensed attorney, Your Honor. I graduated from Yale Law School. I specialized in civil rights law and constitutional law. For the past 6 years, I've been a professor at State University, teaching courses on police procedure, constitutional rights, and civil liberties. I also serve as a consultant for the Department of Justice on their police reform initiatives." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Derek couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. A civil rights attorney, a law professor, a Department of Justice consultant. He'd arrested a Department of Justice consultant. "I've spent my career," Victoria continued, "studying cases exactly like mine, documenting patterns of police misconduct, helping citizens understand their rights, training officers on constitutional law, and 3 weeks ago I experienced firsthand what I've been studying for years." She turned and looked at Derek for the first time. Her eyes weren't angry. They were something worse. They were disappointed, like a teacher looking at a student who'd failed an easy test. "I knew what Officer Thompson was doing the moment he ordered me from my car," she said. "I knew he had no legal basis to search my vehicle. I knew my rights. But I also knew that none of that mattered in that moment, because he had a badge and I didn't, because his word would be believed over mine, because that's how the system works." She turned back to the judge. "But I also knew something else. I knew how to fight back. I knew what evidence I'd need. I knew which cameras to look for, which records to preserve, which laws had been broken. Most people don't know those things. Most people don't have the resources or education to fight back. They just become another statistic, another dismissed complaint, another person who learns not to trust the police." Judge Morrison was nodding slowly. She looked at Derek again, and this time he saw disgust in her expression. "Officer Thompson," the judge said, "do you have anything to say?" Derek stood on shaky legs. His mind was blank. His mouth was dry. What could he possibly say? The evidence was right there. His own words were right there. His pattern was right there. I was just doing my job, Your Honor." "Your job," Judge Morrison repeated, her voice flat. "Your job is to protect and serve. Your job is to uphold the law, not abuse it. Your job is to respect the constitutional rights of every citizen, not violate them." She shuffled the papers in front of her. "Motion to dismiss is granted. All charges against Dr. Hayes are dropped immediately. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full transcript of these proceedings to be sent to Internal Affairs and the District Attorney's Office for review." She looked at Derek one final time. "Officer Thompson, I suggest you get yourself a lawyer, because something tells me you're going to need one." Derek walked out of that courtroom in a daze. His legs felt weak. His uniform, which had always made him feel powerful, now felt like it was suffocating him. People in the hallway stepped aside as he passed, but not out of respect this time. Out of something else, judgment, disgust, maybe even pity. His phone started buzzing before he even reached his car. Lieutenant Foster. Then Captain Reynolds. Then the police union representative. Then Internal Affairs. Everyone wanted to talk to him. Everyone wanted answers. Derek let it ring. He couldn't face any of them yet. When he finally got home, he sat in his car in the driveway for 20 minutes. Just sat there staring at nothing. How had this happened? How had a simple traffic stop turned into this nightmare? But it wasn't simple, was it? He'd known that even then. He'd escalated it. He'd knocked her phone away. He'd arrested her for nothing. And he'd done it because she'd questioned him. Because she'd made him feel small. The call from Lieutenant Foster came again. This time Derek answered. "Get down to the station now, we need to talk." The drive back felt longer than it actually was. Derek kept replaying everything in his mind. The judge's face. Victoria's calm voice explaining exactly who she was. That text message on the screen for everyone to see. Another uppity one who needed to learn respect. God, what had he been thinking? At the station, the atmosphere was different. Officers who usually joked with him looked away. Some whispered as he passed. Lisa Watkins, the officer who'd once tried to warn him about his behavior, just shook her head sadly. Lieutenant Foster's office was small and cramped. The lieutenant was a big man with 25 years on the force. He'd always backed Derek before, always taken his side, but today his face was hard. "Sit down," Foster said. It wasn't a request. Derek sat. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Foster didn't yell. Somehow that was worse. "Do you understand the position you've put this department in?" "I was just doing my job." "Stop. Just stop with that." Foster pulled up something on his computer. "I've been reviewing your arrest records. 8 years of them. And you want to know what I found? A pattern. Dr. Hayes' lawyer was right. 17 complaints that we dismissed. 17. Those were all cleared. They were buried," Foster interrupted. "There's a difference. We protected you. The department protected you, and you kept doing the same thing over and over again." Derek felt his throat tighten. "That text message," Foster continued. "Please tell me you didn't actually send that." Derek couldn't answer. "Of course you did." Foster leaned back in his chair. "Do you know who Victoria Hayes really is? She doesn't just consult for the Department of Justice. She's one of the leading voices in the country on police reform. She's testified before Congress. She's written papers that helped shape policy in 6 states. And you arrested her. You knocked her phone out of her hand and arrested her." The lieutenant pulled up more files. "Internal Affairs is already investigating. They're going through every arrest you've made, every complaint, every report. And Derek, they're finding problems everywhere." Derek's hands were shaking. He clasped them together to make it stop. "There's more," Foster said, and his voice got quieter. "The media knows. Someone leaked the story. By tomorrow morning, this is going to be everywhere. Local news, national news, social media. All of it. How? It doesn't matter how. What matters is that Dr. Hayes built an airtight case. She documented everything. She reached out to every person who'd ever filed a complaint against you. She has statements from 12 of them willing to go on record. She has evidence we didn't even know existed." Foster closed his laptop. "You're suspended. Effective immediately. Pending investigation. Turn in your badge and your weapon." The words hit Derek like physical blows. His badge. His weapon. The 2 things that had defined him for 8 years. "Lieutenant, please, there's nothing I can do. This is coming from the top. The chief, the mayor's office, everyone. They want distance from this. They want to show they're taking it seriously." Derek stood on shaky legs. He unclipped his badge from his belt. The metal felt heavier than it ever had before. He set it on Foster's desk along with his service weapon. "Go home," Foster said. "Don't talk to the media. Don't talk to anyone without the union rep present. And Derek, get a lawyer. A good one." The walk out of the station was the longest of Derek's life. He had to go through the main room where everyone worked. Conversation stopped as he passed. Some officers looked sympathetic. Most didn't. He was a liability now. A problem. Someone who'd brought shame to the department. His phone was exploding with messages by the time he got back to his car. News outlets requesting interviews. Fellow officers asking what happened. His parents confused and worried after seeing something on social media. Then came the friend requests and messages from strangers. People calling him names. People saying they'd been waiting for officers like him to get caught. People sharing the story, adding their own experiences with police. It was spreading like wildfire. Derek drove home in silence. No radio, no podcast. Just the sound of his own breathing and the occasional buzz of his phone. That night, the story hit the local news. Derek watched from his couch as his own face appeared on screen. They showed his photo from the department website. They showed footage from the security camera. They interviewed Victoria Hayes, poised and articulate, explaining what had happened and why it mattered. "This isn't about revenge," Victoria said on camera. This is about accountability. Officer Thompson represents a systemic problem. Officers who abuse their authority because they believe the badge makes them untouchable. Citizens who are afraid to assert their rights because they know the system favors the police. This has to change. The reporter asked if she planned to sue. Victoria smiled slightly. I'm considering all legal options. Derek's phone rang. His mother. He let it go to voicemail. He couldn't talk to her. Couldn't explain this. What would he even say? The next morning it got worse. The story had gone national. Cable news picked it up. Social media was flooded with it. Hashtags were trending. People were digging up information about every case Derek had ever worked. Names of people he'd arrested were being shared. Their stories were being told. The college kid who'd been arrested for jaywalking did an interview. I tried to file a complaint, he said. Nobody listened. Nobody cared. I'm just glad someone finally caught him. The daughter of the elderly man spoke too. My father was humiliated. He sat on his own porch in his own neighborhood and got treated like a criminal. We settled because we couldn't afford to fight. We had no other choice, story after story, person after person, all saying the same thing. Derek Thompson had abused his power, and the system had let him. Derek stopped watching the news, stopped checking social media, but it didn't matter. The world was talking about him whether he listened or not. Internal Affairs called him in for an interview. It lasted 4 hours. They went through everything. Every arrest, every complaint, every incident. Derek answered their questions mechanically. What could he say? The evidence was clear. His own words condemned him. The union rep tried to be helpful. They're building a case for termination, he explained. But we can fight it. We can argue that you were following the training you received, that the department failed to properly supervise you, but Derek barely heard him. He was thinking about Victoria's face in that courtroom, the disappointment in her eyes, like she'd expected better from him, like she'd hoped he would be better. 2 weeks after the court hearing, Derek received official notice. The department was moving to terminate his employment. 8 years of service ended. They cited multiple policy violations, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer. His friends stopped calling. The ones who did call either wanted gossip or wanted to lecture him. Some of his fellow officers reached out with support, but even that felt hollow. They were supporting him because he was one of them, not because they thought he was right. Derek spent his days at home watching his life fall apart in real time. His landlord asked him to move out when his lease ended next month. Word had spread about who he was. His girlfriend, who he'd been dating for 6 months, broke up with him over text. She'd seen the news, seen the videos. She didn't want to be associated with him. The worst part wasn't the anger from strangers. It wasn't even losing his job. The worst part was the quiet moments alone when Derek had to face what he'd actually done, not just to Victoria, but to 17 other people. 17 people who'd been right to complain, right to be angry, right to feel violated. He'd spent 8 years believing he was the good guy, the one keeping order, the one maintaining respect, but he'd been the problem all along. Late one night, Derek found himself looking at old photos from the police academy, young, eager, ready to serve and protect. When had that changed? When had the badge become about power instead of service? When had he stopped seeing citizens as people he was meant to help and started seeing them as threats to his authority? He didn't have answers, just regrets. So many regrets, his phone buzzed. A news alert. Victoria Hayes had filed a federal lawsuit, not just against him, against the entire police department for systemic failure to address misconduct. The case was being watched nationally as a potential landmark for police reform. Derek set down his phone and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't over. It was just beginning, and he had no one to blame but himself. The termination hearing happened on a cold Thursday morning in November. Derek sat at a long table with his union representative, facing a panel of department officials. They read through the charges one by one. Abuse of authority, false arrest, conduct unbecoming an officer, pattern of misconduct, failure to follow proper procedures. Derek didn't fight it. What was the point? The evidence was overwhelming. The videos didn't lie. His own text messages didn't lie. The 17 complaints he'd dismissed as troublemakers and liars turned out to be 17 people telling the truth. The decision was unanimous. After 8 years with the Metropolitan Police Department, Derek Thompson was no longer a police officer. He cleaned out his locker that same day. 8 years of his life fit into 2 cardboard boxes. Photos, certificates, personal items. The locker next to his had belonged to Officer Mitchell, the guy he'd texted after arresting Victoria. Mitchell wasn't there. Nobody was there. They'd made sure of that. No dramatic goodbyes. No final handshakes. Just Derek, 2 boxes, and the echo of his footsteps in an empty locker room. But Victoria wasn't finished. 2 months after Derek's termination, she filed her federal lawsuit. The case was officially titled Hayes versus Thompson and the Metropolitan Police Department. It accused Derek of violating her civil rights and accused the